Sometimes the worst day of your life is only the beginning of someone else changing your future forever. Claire Bennett tightened her grip on the strap of her worn handbag as two hotel security guards walked beside her through the crowded marble lobby of the Grand Sterling Hotel in downtown Chicago. Every pair of eyes in the building seemed locked on her. Guests paused beside the gold-trimmed elevators. Employees whispered near the front desk. Someone even pulled out a phone to record the scene. Claire felt her face burn with humiliation as her manager's voice echoed across the lobby louder than it needed to. "You should have thought about your job before showing up almost an hour late," Margaret Cole snapped while crossing her arms. Her sharp heels clicked against the polished floor as she followed behind Claire like she wanted everyone to enjoy the spectacle. Claire swallowed hard and tried to keep her composure. "Please, Margaret, I tried to explain what happened," she said quietly. "A man was hurt on the side of the road. Nobody stopped to help him." Margaret let out a cold laugh. "And that's supposed to pay your bills?" A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks, but nobody said a word. Claire glanced toward the massive glass entrance doors where heavy rain poured outside onto Michigan Avenue. Her shift had started at 7:30 that morning. She had left home before sunrise after making breakfast for her 8-year-old daughter Lily, and promising her she'd be home in time to help with her school project later that night. Claire had been trying for months to avoid exactly this situation. One more late arrival and she knew Margaret would fire her. But then she had seen him. A man sitting alone near the curb beside a black SUV with his white dress shirt stained from a cut near his forehead, looking disoriented while traffic rushed past him in the rain. People stared but kept walking. Claire had stopped, and now she was paying for it. "You embarrassed this hotel," Margaret continued loudly. "We can replace employees who don't take responsibility." Claire's eyes watered, but she refused to cry in front of everyone. Losing this job wasn't just embarrassing. It was terrifying. Rent was already overdue. Lily needed new asthma medication by next week. And the electricity bill sitting on her kitchen counter was marked final notice in bright red letters. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. Margaret pulled a folded paper from her clipboard and shoved it into Claire's hand. "Your employee access has been terminated effective immediately." One of the guards reached for Claire's ID badge clipped to her uniform. She slowly removed it herself before handing it over. The silence in the lobby suddenly felt heavier than the storm outside. Claire lowered her eyes and walked toward the exit doors, trying to ignore the whispers around her. But as she stepped out into the cold Chicago rain, she never noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street. Inside the back seat, a tall man in a dark overcoat watched her through the tinted window without saying a word. His expression was calm, unreadable. Beside him, another man spoke carefully. "Mr. Walker, should I have the car brought around?" Ethan Walker kept his eyes on Claire as she disappeared down the sidewalk in the rain, clutching the termination paper against her chest. Then he finally answered in a quiet voice. "No. First, I want to know why the kindest woman in this city was just fired from my hotel." Claire walked nearly 12 blocks through the freezing rain before finally reaching the small apartment building on the west side of Chicago. By the time she climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, her shoes were soaked and her hands were trembling from the cold. She stopped outside apartment 3B for a moment, forcing herself to breathe before unlocking the door. The last thing she wanted was for Lily to see how scared she really was. The tiny apartment smelled like canned tomato soup and laundry detergent. A small lamp glowed beside the couch while old cartoons played softly on the television. The second Lily heard the door open, she jumped off the couch and ran toward her mother with a smile that instantly broke Claire's heart. "Mom, you are home early," Lily said happily as she wrapped her arms around Claire's waist. Claire forced herself to smile back, even though her chest felt tight. "Yeah, sweetheart. The hotel was not busy today." Lily looked up at her with innocent eyes. "Did you help the man?" Claire froze for half a second. Before leaving that morning, she had told Lily over the phone why she might be late. Claire slowly nodded. "I did." Lily smiled proudly. "Good. Grandma always said good people help others first." Claire turned away quickly before her daughter could notice the tears filling her eyes. She hung her wet coat near the heater and glanced at the stack of unpaid bills sitting on the kitchen counter beside an empty bottle of Lily's asthma medication. She already knew there was barely enough money left in her checking account for groceries. Losing her job was not just another setback anymore. It was a disaster. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep on the couch while coloring pictures for school, Claire quietly opened her laptop at the kitchen table and began searching for jobs. Waitress positions, cleaning services, grocery stores, anything. But every listing required experience she did not have, hours she could not work, or transportation she could not afford. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a new message from her landlord. Reminder: rent is now 6 days overdue. Payment must be received by Friday. Claire closed her eyes slowly. Friday was only 3 days away. Across the city, inside the top-floor penthouse suite of the Grand Sterling Hotel, Ethan Walker stood near the massive windows overlooking downtown Chicago, while reviewing a tablet handed to him by his assistant Daniel Reed. "This is everything we found on Claire Bennett," Daniel said carefully. Ethan scrolled silently through the file. Employee evaluations, customer feedback, attendance records. Every review described Claire the same way: kind, reliable, professional. One guest had even written, "She treated my elderly mother with more care than the hospital staff did." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "And this employee was fired over one late arrival?" Daniel nodded. Margaret Cole documented it as repeated tardiness. Ethan looked back at the security footage paused on the screen. Claire kneeling beside him in the rain. Earlier that morning, while cars drove past without stopping, she had no idea who he was. She helped anyway. Most people treated Ethan Walker like a walking bank account the moment they recognized him. But Claire had looked at him like he was just another human being who needed help. For the first time in a long while, that stayed in his mind. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "Should I contact Human Resources tomorrow?" Ethan remained silent for several seconds before finally answering, "No, not yet." He continued staring at Claire's employee photo on the tablet. "I want to see who she really is when nobody thinks anyone important is watching." The next morning, Claire woke up before sunrise to the sound of coughing from the small bedroom across the hall. She immediately sat up from the couch where she had fallen asleep beside her laptop and hurried to Lily's room. Her daughter was sitting upright under the blankets, breathing carefully while clutching her stuffed rabbit against her chest. Claire gently brushed the blonde hair away from Lily's face and forced herself to stay calm. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded slowly. "I just need my inhaler." Claire reached for the nearly empty inhaler on the nightstand and watched the medication counter blink red. 2 doses left. Her stomach tightened instantly. She knew exactly what that meant. If she could not refill the prescription soon, things could get dangerous fast. But she pushed the fear aside and kissed Lily's forehead. "I am going to figure everything out today, okay?" Lily gave a small smile. "You always do." Those words followed Claire the entire morning, as she rode 2 different buses across Chicago searching for work. She visited diners, coffee shops, grocery stores, and retail stores with a folder of printed resumes tucked under her arm. Everywhere she went, the answers sounded the same. "We are not hiring right now. You can apply online. We need someone with open availability." By noon, her feet ached and the cold wind cut through her thin coat, while she stood outside another restaurant reading a help wanted sign taped to the window. For one brief second, hope returned, but inside, the manager barely looked up from the register before shaking his head. "Sorry, we already filled the position this morning." Claire thanked him politely anyway and stepped back outside into the crowded street. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. 1 voicemail from the electric company warning that service could be disconnected within 48 hours, unless payment was received. Claire leaned against the side of the building and closed her eyes. She felt exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. Meanwhile, at the Grand Sterling Hotel, Ethan Walker walked quietly through the employee hallways wearing a simple charcoal coat instead of one of his expensive tailored suits. Most staff members did not even recognize him without the security team and formal appearances they were used to seeing online. He stopped near the housekeeping department and listened silently while employees worked. "Did you hear what happened to Claire?" one woman whispered while folding towels. "Margaret fired her in front of guests." Another employee lowered his voice nervously. "Claire was one of the only decent people here." Ethan said nothing, but every comment only confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. Fear ran the hotel more than leadership did. Later that afternoon, Ethan entered the employee records office with Daniel following close behind. Pull all customer complaint reports involving Margaret Cole during the last 2 years, Ethan said calmly. Daniel looked surprised. All of them. Ethan nodded once. And every employee resignation connected to her department. Daniel quickly began typing. Within minutes, complaint after complaint appeared on the screen. Staff intimidation, public humiliation, verbal mistreatment. Ethan stared silently at the reports while anger slowly built beneath his calm expression. Then one sentence caught his attention from a resignation letter written months earlier. Management rewards cruelty and punishes kindness. Ethan leaned back in his chair slowly. He remembered Claire kneeling beside him in the freezing rain while strangers walked away pretending not to notice him. She had expected nothing in return. No attention. No reward. And somehow she ended up losing the most. Ethan looked toward the city skyline outside the office window before speaking quietly. Find out where Claire Bennett lives. Daniel hesitated carefully. You are planning to meet her personally? Ethan answered without taking his eyes off the window. No one should suffer for doing the right thing. That evening, Claire sat alone at the small kitchen table while Lily slept in the next room. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional sound of traffic outside the building. A single envelope rested in front of her beside a cup of cold coffee. Final eviction warning. Claire stared at the paper for several seconds before folding it closed again. She could survive skipping meals. She could survive exhaustion. But the thought of Lily losing the only home she had left made her chest ache in a way she could not explain. Claire opened her wallet slowly and counted the cash inside. $26. That was all she had until she found another job. Her phone suddenly buzzed on the table, making her jump slightly. The caller ID showed the pharmacy downtown. Claire answered immediately. Hello. The pharmacist spoke gently. Miss Bennett, we wanted to remind you that Lily's prescription refill is ready for pickup, but insurance did not cover the full amount this month. Claire closed her eyes. How much is it? $184. Claire swallowed hard before forcing herself to answer calmly. Okay, thank you. I will come in as soon as I can. After hanging up, she lowered her head into her hands. For the first time in years, she truly did not know what to do next. Across the city, Ethan Walker sat inside the back seat of his car while Daniel drove through Claire's neighborhood. Rainwater reflected the city lights across the streets, as Ethan quietly observed the old apartment buildings lining the block. This is where she lives? Ethan asked. Daniel nodded carefully. 3rd floor. 1-bedroom apartment. According to records, she has lived here almost 6 years. Ethan looked out the window again as a mother pushed a stroller through the cold evening wind while carrying grocery bags in both hands. It had been a long time since Ethan had seen this side of the city up close. Most billionaires preferred to keep their distance from struggle. But Ethan remembered growing up in a small apartment himself before his father built the company that later became a billion-dollar empire. He remembered what fear looked like when bills piled up faster than paychecks. Daniel slowed the car as they passed Claire's building. A small light glowed from one of the 3rd-floor windows. Ethan noticed the faded curtains and cracked window frame. Nothing about Claire's life looked easy. Yet somehow she had still stopped to help a complete stranger in the middle of a storm. Daniel glanced at him through the rearview mirror. You could send financial assistance anonymously if you want. Ethan remained silent for a moment. No, Daniel looked confused. Ethan finally answered quietly. People who are struggling do not only need money. Sometimes they need dignity. Meanwhile upstairs, Claire quietly entered Lily's bedroom and sat beside her sleeping daughter. Lily shifted slightly beneath the blankets before opening her eyes halfway. Mom! Claire smiled softly. Sorry, sweetheart. I did not mean to wake you. Lily rubbed her eyes sleepily. Did you find a new job? Claire hesitated for a brief second before answering honestly. Not yet. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a wrinkled dollar bill along with several coins. You can use my lunch money. Claire felt tears instantly fill her eyes. Oh baby, no. Lily pushed the money into her mother's hand anyway. You always help me when I am scared. Claire pulled her daughter into a tight hug while silently trying not to cry. Outside the apartment building, a black luxury sedan remained parked across the street for several more minutes before finally driving away into the Chicago night. By Friday morning, the temperature in Chicago had dropped below 40 degrees, and Claire could see her breath as she waited at a crowded bus stop downtown. She had spent the last 2 days applying for every job she could find, but nothing had worked out. One restaurant manager told her she looked too tired to handle customers. Another offered her part-time hours that barely covered transportation costs. Claire kept smiling politely anyway because she could not afford to lose hope. Inside her handbag sat the final $20 she had after buying Lily's prescription refill the night before. She had paid for it using the emergency credit card she promised herself never to touch again. The minimum payment alone would be impossible next month. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. The screen showed the name of Lily's school. Claire answered immediately with panic already rising in her chest. "Hello." A woman's voice responded kindly. "Miss Bennett, this is the nurse from Lincoln Elementary. Lily had a mild asthma episode during recess. She is okay now, but we recommend someone picks her up early." Claire closed her eyes in relief for a brief moment before anxiety replaced it again. "I am on my way." She hung up and looked across the street at the small diner where she had been scheduled for a job interview in 10 minutes. Claire stood frozen between responsibility and survival. If she missed the interview, she might lose her last chance at employment. But if she stayed, Lily would be sitting alone in the nurse's office scared and waiting for her mother. Claire did not hesitate long. She turned and hurried toward the nearest bus stop instead. Meanwhile, inside the executive conference room at the Grand Sterling Hotel, Margaret Cole confidently adjusted her blazer while preparing for a management meeting she believed would help her earn a promotion. Several department heads sat around the long glass table reviewing reports while assistants carried coffee trays across the room. Then the doors opened unexpectedly. Every conversation immediately stopped. Ethan Walker entered quietly alongside Daniel Reed. Margaret straightened instantly, her face changing from confidence to nervous excitement. Ethan rarely attended internal meetings in person. "Mr. Walker," she said quickly with a polished smile, "we were not expecting you today." Ethan nodded once before taking a seat at the end of the table. His calm expression revealed nothing. "Please continue." Margaret began presenting quarterly numbers while trying to sound composed, but Ethan barely looked at the financial charts on the screen. Instead, he reviewed another file resting silently in front of him. Employee complaints, exit interviews, internal reports connected directly to Margaret's department. After several minutes, Ethan finally interrupted. "How many employees resigned under your supervision last year?" Margaret blinked in surprise. "I would need to check exact numbers." Ethan looked up calmly. 23. The room fell silent. Margaret forced a nervous laugh. "Well, hospitality can be a stressful industry." Ethan's voice remained even. "How many were formally disciplined for attendance issues?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "I believe 6. Ethan closed the file slowly. "And how many of those employees were single parents?" Nobody in the room moved. Margaret's polished smile disappeared little by little as she realized this conversation was not random. Daniel quietly slid several printed complaints across the table toward Ethan. One statement had been highlighted in yellow. "Claire Bennett." Ethan finally looked directly at Margaret for the first time. "Tell me," he said calmly, "what kind of company punishes compassion but rewards humiliation?" Across the city, Claire rushed through the crowded hallway of Lincoln Elementary until she spotted Lily sitting alone outside the nurse's office clutching her backpack. The moment Lily saw her mother, she smiled weakly and whispered, "I knew you would come." Claire hugged her tightly without realizing that at the exact same moment, Ethan Walker had just begun dismantling the system that destroyed her life. Claire spent the rest of the afternoon sitting beside Lily on the old couch while cartoons played softly in the background. Lily seemed better after using her inhaler, but Claire could still hear the slight wheeze in her breathing every now and then. Each sound made Claire more anxious about the future. She checked her phone repeatedly hoping for a callback from one of the jobs she applied to earlier that week, but the screen remained empty except for unpaid bill, reminders and automated messages. Around 6 o'clock that evening, the apartment suddenly went dark. The television shut off. The heater stopped humming. For a second, the entire apartment fell completely silent. Lily looked up immediately. "Mom!" Claire forced herself to stay calm while standing from the couch. "It is okay, sweetheart. The power probably just went out in the building." But deep down she already knew the truth. She slowly walked to the kitchen counter where the overdue electric bill still sat unopened. Final disconnection notice. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned against the counter. She had been trying so hard to protect Lily from fear, but now even that was slipping away. Lily quietly walked into the kitchen carrying a small flashlight from her bedroom drawer. "Here," she said softly. Claire took the flashlight and smiled weakly. "Thank you, baby." The cold inside the apartment became noticeable within minutes without the heater running. Claire wrapped Lily in blankets and lit 2 small candles near the kitchen sink. The flickering light made the tiny apartment feel even smaller than usual. "This is kind of like camping," Lily whispered with a hopeful smile. Claire nodded even though her chest felt heavy. "Yeah, exactly like camping." Lily looked at her carefully for a moment before asking the question Claire had been dreading. "Are we going to be okay?" Claire sat beside her daughter and pulled her close. "We are together. That is what matters." But after Lily eventually fell asleep against her shoulder, Claire quietly cried for the first time since losing her job. She covered her mouth with her hand so Lily would not hear her breaking down in the dark. Across the city, Ethan Walker stood alone inside his penthouse office reviewing another stack of reports Daniel had prepared earlier that day. The investigation into Margaret Cole had uncovered years of complaints hidden beneath polished management reviews. Employees had been threatened, humiliated, and pushed out quietly to protect performance numbers. Ethan stared at one report after another with growing frustration. Then Daniel entered carrying a tablet. "There is something else. You should see." Ethan looked up as Daniel placed the tablet on the desk. Security footage from outside Claire's apartment building appeared on the screen. The building maintenance company had reported a utility shutoff earlier that evening. Ethan watched silently as Claire carried grocery bags upstairs in the dark while holding Lily's hand. Neither of them knew anyone was watching. Daniel spoke carefully. "She still has not found work." Ethan remained quiet for several seconds. "And the child?" Daniel glanced at his notes. "Asthma condition. Medication expenses are significant for her income level." Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. Something about the image of Claire sitting in candlelight with her daughter unsettled him deeply. Most people in his world solved problems by throwing money at them and moving on. But this felt different. Claire had already sacrificed enough simply for choosing compassion over convenience. Ethan looked toward the Chicago skyline glowing outside the massive windows of his office. "Schedule a meeting with Margaret Cole tomorrow morning," he said calmly. Daniel nodded. "And Claire Bennett?" Ethan's expression remained unreadable. "Tomorrow," he answered quietly. "Her life changes." The next morning, Claire woke up stiff and exhausted after barely sleeping through the freezing night. The apartment was still without electricity, and the cold air inside felt even harsher now that the sun had not fully risen yet. She quietly tucked another blanket around Lily before stepping into the kitchen to count what little food remained. Half a loaf of bread, a can of soup, peanut butter. Claire stared at the nearly empty shelves while trying to calculate how many days she could stretch everything. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the apartment door. Claire froze instantly. For one terrible second she thought it might be the landlord. Another knock followed, calmer this time. Claire carefully opened the door halfway, and immediately recognized the man standing in the hallway. Her eyes widened in complete shock. It was him, the injured stranger from the roadside. Except this time he looked completely different. No blood on his shirt, no confusion in his eyes. He stood tall in a perfectly tailored dark coat, with polished shoes and the quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to the moment he entered a room. Behind him stood another man holding a leather folder. Claire blinked several times, unsure if she was imagining this. "You," she whispered. Ethan Walker gave a small nod. "Good morning, Claire." Hearing her name from his mouth made her even more confused. Claire instinctively glanced behind her toward Lily sleeping inside the apartment before looking back at him cautiously. "How do you know my name?" Ethan looked at her for a moment before answering honestly. "Because I know exactly what happened to you after you helped me." Claire felt her stomach tighten. She suddenly became aware of the freezing apartment behind her, the blankets piled on the couch, and the fact that she had not even had time to brush her hair yet. Embarrassment washed over her immediately. "Look, if this is about the accident, I already said you did not owe me anything," she said quietly. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "I know." Claire folded her arms against the cold. "Then why are you here?" Before Ethan could answer, Lily's sleepy voice came from inside the apartment. "Mom!" Claire quickly turned around. "I am okay, sweetheart." Lily walked into the living room rubbing her eyes before suddenly stopping when she saw Ethan standing at the doorway. Ethan noticed immediately how pale the little girl looked. Claire stepped aside awkwardly. "This is my daughter Lily." Ethan nodded politely. "Hello, Lily." Lily stared at him curiously for a second before whispering to Claire, "Is he the man you helped?" Claire hesitated, then nodded slowly. Ethan looked between them quietly, and for the first time in years, something about the moment felt deeply personal instead of transactional. He was not standing inside a boardroom negotiating billion-dollar contracts. He was standing in a freezing apartment where a little girl was wearing 2 sweaters indoors because her mother lost everything for helping a stranger. Ethan finally looked back at Claire. "May I come in for a moment?" Claire hesitated before stepping aside. Ethan entered slowly, taking in the tiny apartment without judgment. The candles on the counter, the unpaid bills stacked near the sink, the extra blankets covering the windows to block the cold air. Daniel remained near the doorway while Ethan faced Claire again. "There is something you need to know," he said calmly. Claire waited silently. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed her a business card. Claire looked down at it and immediately felt her breath catch in her throat. "Ethan Walker, Chief Executive Officer, Walker International Holdings." Her eyes widened as realization hit her all at once. The billionaire owner of the Grand Sterling Hotel was standing in her living room. Claire stared down at the business card in her trembling hands while her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Ethan Walker was not just a wealthy businessman. His name appeared on television interviews, magazine covers, and the side of buildings across the country. Everyone in Chicago knew who he was. Claire slowly looked back up at him in disbelief. "You own the hotel?" Ethan nodded calmly. "Yes." Claire let out a quiet breath and leaned against the kitchen counter for support. Suddenly every moment from that rainy morning replayed in her head differently. The black SUV, the expensive watch she barely noticed, the way hospital staff reacted when he arrived. She had helped one of the richest men in America without even realizing it. Lily looked between them with wide, curious eyes. "Mom, is he famous?" Claire almost laughed from the shock of the situation, but no words came out. Ethan gave Lily a small smile. "Something like that." Claire finally found her voice again. "I do not understand why you are here." Ethan glanced around the apartment one more time before answering. "Because after you helped me, you lost your job, your electricity, and nearly your ability to care for your daughter." Claire immediately shook her head. "That is not your fault." Ethan looked directly at her. "No. But it became my responsibility the moment I learned the truth." Claire lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the condition of the apartment and overwhelmed by the attention from someone so powerful. She had spent years surviving quietly without expecting help from anyone. Accepting kindness felt unfamiliar. Ethan reached into the folder Daniel was holding and removed several documents. "Margaret Cole has been terminated effective immediately," he said calmly. Claire looked up in surprise. Ethan continued, "After reviewing internal complaints and employee reports, it became clear she should not have been managing anyone." Claire struggled to respond. Part of her felt relieved, but another part still could not believe any of this was real. Ethan placed another document carefully on the table in front of her. "I would also like to offer you a new position at the Grand Sterling." Claire blinked in confusion. "A position?" Ethan nodded. "Community Guest Relations Coordinator. Full salary. Full health benefits for you and Lily. Flexible scheduling." Claire stared at the paperwork as if it might disappear at any second. "Why would you do this for me?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Because character matters more than resumes." The apartment fell quiet for a moment except for the faint sounds of traffic outside. Lily looked up at Claire hopefully. Does this mean we can keep our apartment? Claire's eyes filled with tears again. She looked at Ethan, still unable to fully trust what she was hearing. This is too much, she whispered. Ethan shook his head gently. No. What was too much was a mother and child sitting in the dark, because kindness was treated like weakness. Claire covered her mouth as emotion finally overwhelmed her. For days she had carried fear, humiliation, and exhaustion completely alone. Now suddenly someone was standing in front of her saying she did not have to fight anymore. Ethan noticed her hands trembling and softened his voice. There is one more thing. Daniel quietly handed Claire a small envelope. Inside was a receipt showing the overdue rent balance had already been paid along with confirmation that the electricity service would be restored within the hour. Claire looked up instantly. You paid this? Ethan nodded once. Claire shook her head through tears. You did not even know me. Ethan's expression remained calm but sincere. I knew enough. At that exact moment, the apartment lights suddenly flickered back on. Lily gasped excitedly and ran to turn on the lamp beside the couch. Warm light filled the apartment again for the first time in days. Claire stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen while Ethan watched her quietly. Neither of them said anything for several seconds. But for the first time since losing everything, Claire finally felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. 1 year later, the Grand Sterling Hotel looked exactly the same from the outside with its towering glass entrance, gold accents, and luxury cars lining the curb along Michigan Avenue. But inside everything had changed. Employees no longer lowered their voices in fear when management walked by. Staff members smiled more. Guests noticed the difference too. Under Claire Bennett's leadership in community guest relations, the hotel had launched programs supporting struggling families, local shelters, and employee wellness initiatives across the city. What surprised everyone most was that Claire treated every person the same way she had treated a wounded stranger in the rain that morning long ago. With kindness first. Claire adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer while reviewing notes near the front desk before hearing a familiar voice behind her. Mom! Lily ran across the lobby carrying a school project in her arms before hugging Claire tightly. At 9 years old now, Lily looked healthier and happier than she had in years. Her asthma was finally under control, and for the first time since Claire could remember, her daughter smiled without worry in her eyes. Claire laughed softly and kissed the top of her head. How was school? Lily grinned proudly. I got first place in the science fair. Claire's eyes widened. You did. Lily nodded excitedly. Mr. Walker said smart girls should celebrate big wins. Claire smiled instinctively at the mention of Ethan's name. Over the past year, Ethan Walker had become a quiet but constant part of their lives. He never treated Claire like a charity case or reminded her of where she came from. Instead, he listened to her ideas, respected her opinions, and slowly earned her trust in ways no one else ever had. Across the lobby, Ethan stepped out of a conference room wearing a dark suit while speaking with several executives. The moment he noticed Claire and Lily, his serious expression softened immediately. Lily waved excitedly. Mr. Walker. Ethan excused himself from the executives and walked over. I heard someone won first place today, he said with a smile. Lily held up her project proudly. Mom helped me build it. Ethan glanced at Claire warmly. I am not surprised. Claire felt herself blush slightly before changing the subject. How was the board meeting? Ethan gave a small sigh. Long, but worth it. Earlier that morning, Walker International officially announced a new employee protection policy across every hotel property in the country, including emergency support programs for single parents and caregivers. Claire had helped design much of it herself. Ethan looked around the busy lobby for a moment before speaking quietly enough that only Claire could hear. You changed this place more than any executive ever did. Claire shook her head gently. No. You gave me the chance to survive first. Ethan looked at her steadily. You survived long before I met you. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there watching guests move through the lobby, while Christmas decorations sparkled beneath the grand chandeliers overhead. 1 year ago, Claire had walked through those same doors humiliated, terrified, and convinced her life was falling apart. Now she stood there stronger than ever with her daughter beside her, and a future she never thought possible. Lily suddenly looked between them with a mischievous smile. You know, she said proudly. Mom says good people always find each other eventually. Claire laughed softly in embarrassment while Ethan smiled in a way that made his eyes warm for the first time all day. Outside, snow began falling gently across downtown Chicago, as people hurried through the cold streets below. But inside the Grand Sterling Hotel, surrounded by warmth, light, and the people who finally saw her worth, Claire realized something important. The worst moment of her life had not destroyed her after all. It had led her exactly where she was meant to be.